Welcome to the second devlog for Destiny Break. Last video I went over my inspirations for creating the project and my process from getting from prototype to where I'm at now. For this video I want to continue to go over how the combat system evolved from the early days to its current iteration, as well as answering the question I get asked the most, outside of what my dog's name is. That question being how I go about setting up my environments for the game. Combat is an essential component for any JRPG, and everyone has an opinion on what the best combat system is. JRPG combat can be broken down into two main groups: turn-based and action combat. If you watched my last video, you'll know that the combat started off mimicking Star Ocean 2.
Air slap!
So turn-based combat was never an option. So I'm going to walk you through how I went from this to this, what references I used, and how they shape my combat system. Game designer Sid Meier has a famous quote people now refer to as the 33% rule. When designing an entirely new game, it's 33% new, 33% improved, and 33% what everybody already expects to be there. This quote really resonated with me, as it already bared similarities to how I approach game design. I chose Star Ocean as a base for my combat not only because I loved it as a kid, but because I was so familiar with its flaws. I already had ideas about what I wanted to change. For instance, the characters have regular attacks that basically never get used, and you end up just spamming the same powerful special attack over and over again until you run out of MP.
Chaos sword! Chaos sword! Chaos sword!
The only exception are magic users, who are relegated out of the action, and on top of that, time freezes for a long animation every time they cast a spell. So most players don't even use them anyway. So right off the bat, I have some things on my list for improvements. More variety in combat, a use for basic attacks, and a better role for magic users. The first thing I did was add a way to fight defensively. A simple dash that lets the player get behind enemies to dodge attacks. To give the base attacks more usability, I added a simple 3-hit combo for each character, as well as a single power attack. I wanted to get magic users more involved than traditional RPGs, so they get their hands dirty and get involved in the skirmish. But as you can see, she's still got a bit of range to stay safe. You might have noticed I don't detail a lot of my characters, and I know it's faux pas in modern indie development to show off anything that isn't completely polished. But character design for me is very much an iterative process, so committing to detailing design makes it very difficult to justify improving my characters down the road. So most of my animations are done with just the main colors for now. Since animations take a long time, I put off designing how I want to handle special attacks for a little bit. I didn't have a clear idea as to how I wanted them to work. I was using a generic MP system for special attacks as a placeholder, but had always planned to pivot away from that idea. And then, inspiration. Final Fantasy VII Remake's unique way of handling turns involved building up action points via attacking and using those action points for special attacks. I loved this idea, but following the 33% rule, I had some improvements. I wanted to speed it up, give the player more action points, and keep it exclusive to special attacks instead of including items and small skills as actions. I kept this system in for a long time, but there was a problem with it. I was set on having my dashes use a bit of your action gauge, as I didn't want the player dashing around all willy-nilly. But it was hard to see how much action gauge you had remaining for dashing while trying to manage your action points. And sometimes the player would lose an action point after performing a dash. I also thought it wasn't very clear as to why only dash would reduce your action gauge. Before playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I decided to replay my favorite of the series, Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X has abilities called commands that can help you out. Unlike regular abilities, they don't take any MP and just use the player's turn. I like this design as it added lower tier ability variety with minimal effect to the player's resources. I basically already had one in the game with the dash, so I rejigged my battle UI to be a central stamina bar the player will fill up to gain action points. Using abilities like dash will reduce the stamina bar, but won't remove your action points. In addition, when you gain a new action point, I set the stamina bar to 10%, so it doesn't take away your ability to dash. This system will also allow me to add small abilities like a minor self-heal, and let the player manage combat outside of relying on building up action points, and hopefully really bring some variety to combat moving forward. Combat is the main staple of RPGs, but it can also wear out its welcome. One way to ensure this is the inclusion of random encounters, which I initially had for my game. The trouble that comes with removing random encounters isn't placing the enemies or rewriting the encounter system itself. It's designing environments that both look nice and leave enough room for fun encounters. When looking at my environments, the comment I hear the most is, reminds me of Octopath Traveler. I mentioned in my last video the 2D sprites in the 3D world come from Star Ocean for me, but having pre-rendered backgrounds just doesn't fit my skill set or the modern era. And while I use Octopath for a reference for post-processing and lighting, I find its world to be very small compared to the characters. Everything just feels cluttered. There are instant transitions between grass and snow, which causes the in-game world to feel smaller than it is. You can get a sense of what I mean when comparing this boat from Octopath to the boat from my game. Instead of feeling like you're playing inside of a diorama, I want the player to feel like they're in a large, expansive world. My world and its transitions are inspired by my love of Final Fantasy X. Very few games have a world as expansive and filled with more lore as Spira does. Each transition doesn't signify a literal step to the left, but implies a short journey behind the camera between them. The problem with big expansive worlds is you need to do big expansive level design. The early parts of my game take place in a town called Hillfall, that's similar to the Scottish Highlands of our world. I decided to make a tool to make ridge generation easy. It consists of multiple small prefabs that are automatically placed in a grid with a size of my choosing. I added widgets that let me drag individual pieces in and out and up and down. It wasn't without its bugs, but I'm the only one using it, so I didn't want to spend too much time worrying about them. So I fixed major ones and made a simple undo button just in case it gets messed up. I can also manually set any individual pieces that are giving me problems if I need to make drastic changes. Even though it's made of a ton of small parts, when I press play, each ridge combines into a single mesh to improve performance. If I was to finish a scene, I can duplicate my work in progress scene and combine all the meshes so they're game ready. I filled the areas with sprites for flowers, trees, and heavy grass, as well as some 3D clutter like rocks, barrels, and fences. However, I can't just spam the same grass texture everywhere. I needed to recreate the pixel art RPG tiling techniques, but in 3D. So I made a pathing shader that uses a mouse to split between two textures. I made multi-selection support so I could change multiple paths at once. It was a bit slow, but it got the job done. I redid my town with all the new tools and started working on areas outside Hillfall. I found that it was faster for flat grounds to use Unity's terrain tool, which allowed me to quickly prototype some environments, but I couldn't use that for actual games, as it just blended the textures together in a way that didn't look too nice. But I hope you're not taking notes, because I scrapped that tool and went back to the drawing board. I needed something fast, not only for creating base terrain, but something able to create nice looking paths and designs on top of that terrain. I needed a Tilemap tool, but in 3D. So I made that. I got it working for terrain very nicely, and I have a feature list that I want from it, but I can only work on one thing at once. So it's currently on the backlog until I go back to terrain-based environments, as currently I'm working on a ship, which I finished the first pass on. Next I have some character redesigns as well as prototypes for planned features for the game. So it might be a while before we see the 3D Tilemap tool up and running. That does it for this overview of the evolution of my combat system, and an in-depth look at how my environments were designed up until this point. From here on out, this series will shift focus to a more traditional devlog, updating you on what I've recently completed as well as what I'm currently working on. Since it's a story-based game, a lot of things will remain behind the scenes as to not spoil the experience for players. I'd also love to hear suggestions for the game if you have any, or any bonus content you'd like to see, so leave a comment down below if you have anything. Otherwise, cheers.